When Usher, the man who's been dominating stages since the 90s, who stood shoulder to shoulder with Michael Jackson's legacy and Beyoncé's fire, points at two artists from South Korea and says, "That's real stage charisma?" You don't argue. You listen. RM and J-Hope aren't just BTS members. They're two completely opposite forces of nature. One moves crowds with silence and words. The other ignites arenas with pure kinetic energy. But which performances caught the eye of a global showmanship legend? Was it a moment of raw freestyle, a solo stage that rewrote the rules, or something so unexpected even the fans didn't see it coming? Stay locked in. This list hits different.
Number 7. You want to know what separates a good performer from a once-in-a-generation stage animal? It's not the budget. It's not the backup dances. It's not even the song. It's the ability to walk onto a stage where nobody expects anything extraordinary and then absolutely demolish every single expectation in the room within the first 8 counts of music. And that's exactly what Jungkook did on December 2nd, 2016 at the Mnet Asian Music Awards in Hong Kong. The performance? Boy Meets Evil. The setting, one of the biggest award shows in all of Asia, packed with industry heavyweights, senior artists, idol groups who've been in the game for over a decade, and cameras broadcasting to millions across the continent. BTS at that point was still climbing. They were big, sure, but they hadn't yet reached the untouchable, stadium-selling, billboard-charting titan status they'd later become. They were still in that hunger phase, that we have something to prove every single time we step on that stage phase. And the producers behind BTS's Mama stage that year knew exactly what card to play first. They didn't open with the full group. They didn't open with a hype track. They opened with one man, one spotlight, and a contemporary dance solo that had absolutely no business being that intense on a K-pop award show stage. Let's set the scene properly because the context matters more than people realize. Mama 2016 was held at the Asia World Expo in Hong Kong. The venue seats roughly 14,000 people. The lineup that night was stacked. EXO, Twice, 101 predecessors, GOT7, 10 from NCT performing his own legendary solo, and the pressure was absolutely suffocating. Every group brought theatrical stages, fire, water, aerial rigs. It was an arms race of spectacle. And then the lights went dark for BTS's segment, and instead of an explosion, instead of pyro, instead of a bass drop that shakes your chest cavity, you got silence. A single red-toned spotlight fading in on J-Hope, center stage, completely alone, dressed in all black, and the first notes of Boy Meets Evil creeping through the speakers like smoke under a door. Now here's what you need to understand about this choreography. This wasn't idol dancing. This wasn't the synchronized, clean-cut, formation-based movement that K-pop is traditionally known for. This was raw contemporary, fluid, aggressive, emotional. The choreography was crafted to tell a story, the seduction of temptation, the internal war between ambition and innocence, the Faustian bargain of fame. And J-Hope didn't just dance it, he inhabited it. Every single muscle in his body was telling that story. His fingers weren't just extended, they were reaching for something he knew he shouldn't touch. His spins weren't just technical, they were the physical manifestation of a man losing control. The floor work, the way he dropped and recovered, the way his chest heaved, not from exhaustion, but from the character he was embodying. It was the kind of performance that makes choreographers in the audience put down their phones and just watch. And the arena? Dead silent. 14,000 people, and you could hear the fabric of his clothes moving against the stage floor. That's not normal. That doesn't happen at award shows. Award shows are chaotic. Fans are screaming fan chants, holding up light sticks, chatting between stages. But J-Hope commanded a silence that was almost religious. People weren't just watching, they were witnessing. And this is the detail that connects directly to why Usher would recognize this moment. See, Usher built his entire career on the principle that dance isn't decoration, it's communication. Go back and watch Usher's performance of Caught Up at the 2004 VMAs, or his Screen Tour choreography, or even his Las Vegas residency material. Usher doesn't dance at an audience, he dances to them. Every movement has emotional intention, every body roll, every isolation, every freeze, it's saying something. And that's exactly what J-Hope did with Boy Meets Evil. He wasn't showing off technique, even though his technique was flawless. He wasn't trying to impress the judges or the cameras. He was telling a story through his body, and every single person in that arena became a character in that story, whether they wanted to or not. The performance lasted roughly 2.5 minutes before the rest of BTS joined for blood, sweat, and tears. But those 2.5 minutes did something that no amount of pyrotechnics or LED screens could do. They established J-Hope as a performer who operates on a completely different frequency than his peers. Not better, different. The kind of different that makes industry veterans sit up in their chairs. The aftermath was immediate and loud. Dance channels on YouTube started breaking down the choreography frame by frame.
Number 6. Let's talk about something the music industry rarely discusses openly, but every single performer knows in their bones: the weight of going solo when the world only sees you as part of a unit. When you're the leader of the biggest group on the planet, every time you step onto a stage alone, you're not just performing, you're answering a question that millions of people are silently asking. Can he hold it down without the other six? On April 18, 2019, Kim Namjoon walked onto the M Countdown stage to perform Intro Persona, and what happened over the next 4 minutes wasn't just a comeback stage, it was a masterclass in what Usher would call owned presence. The ability to make a massive stage feel like your living room, where you're the only person who matters and everyone else is just lucky to be invited. Now let's rewind for a second and understand why this performance carries so much gravity. Map of the Soul Persona was BTS's first release after they'd essentially conquered everything. They'd spoken at the United Nations, they'd performed at the Grammys, they'd sold out Wembley Stadium, the Rose Bowl, MetLife, arenas and stadiums that Western legacy acts spent entire careers dreaming about. The pressure on the comeback wasn't just musical, it was existential. The entire industry, from Seoul to Los Angeles to London, was watching to see if BTS could sustain momentum at a level that had never been achieved by an Asian act before. And Big Hit made a bold, almost audacious decision. The very first taste the world would get of this new era wasn't a full group track. It wasn't a visual, heavy music video with all 7 members. It was RM, alone, rapping. The track itself is a philosophical bomb wrapped in a hip-hop beat. Intro Persona samples the melodic hook from BTS's 2014 track Intro School Love Affair, creating this beautiful sonic bridge between who they were, hungry, underground, desperate to be heard, and who they'd become, global, untouchable, epoch-defining. In the lyrics, RM is literally interrogating himself. "Who am I?" he asks. Not as a rhetorical device, but as a genuine, almost painful question. He's peeling back the layers of fame, identity, performance, and authenticity in real time. And he's doing it at a speed and with a rhythmic complexity that would make most rappers ask for a second take. But RM doesn't get second takes on a live stage. He gets one shot, one camera, one audience, and whatever his lungs and his mind can deliver in that moment. The M Countdown stage setup was deliberately minimal compared to BTS's usual theatrical productions. No massive LED walls displaying cinematic visuals, no 30 backup dancers in synchronized formation, no pyrotechnics, no flying harnesses, just RM. A relatively stripped-back stage design with bold lighting and a handful of dancers who were there more as atmospheric elements than choreographic partners. And that was the point. The production team understood something crucial. When you have a performer with genuine charisma, you don't bury them in spectacle. You strip everything away and let them fill the space with nothing but their energy. And Namjoon filled it. He didn't just fill it, he overflowed it. From the very first bar, RM established a physical language that was completely different from what people expected. See, there's this persistent narrative in the K-pop space, and honestly in the broader fan community, that RM is the clumsy one, the one who breaks things, the one who's technically the least polished dancer in BTS. And while some of that is rooted in playful self-deprecation that Namjoon himself leans into, it's created this wildly inaccurate perception that he somehow lacks stage presence. Intro Persona on M Countdown obliterated that narrative with a sledgehammer.
Watch the performance back. Watch how RM moves. He's not trying to be J-Hope. He's not trying to be Jimin. He's moving like a rapper. Chest forward, shoulders rolling, every step deliberate and weighted with intention. There's a moment about 90 seconds in where the beat drops into a harder pocket, and RM does this thing where he plants his feet, leans back slightly, and delivers an entire 16-bar section with nothing but his voice, his breath control, and a stare directly into the camera that could cut glass. No movement, no choreography, just stillness and words. And it's magnetic. It's the kind of moment that Usher has built entire concert segments around. The understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing a performer can do is stop moving and just exist in the pocket of the beat. Usher did it during his Confessions-era live shows. He'd be in the middle of a high-energy dance sequence, and then suddenly he'd stop, grab the mic stand, and just sing. No movement, no flash, just raw vocal delivery.
Number 5. There's a difference between performing for your fans and performing for strangers. Your fans already love you. They know the fan chants, they know the choreography. They've memorized your set list, your stage habits, your water drinking moments, your between-song speeches. Performing for fans is beautiful, emotional, electric, but it's also safe. You're preaching to the converted. Now imagine walking onto a stage where the majority of the audience doesn't know your discography, doesn't know your fan chants, doesn't know if you sing, rap, dance, or do all three. They're standing in an open field in 90-degree Chicago summer heat, some of them slightly drunk. Most of them there because the festival wristband they bought also gets them Metallica, Dua Lipa, and Green Day on other days. They're curious at best, skeptical at worst. And you, one person from Gwangju, South Korea, have to walk out onto that stage and make 100,000 of those people believe you belong there. Not just belong, headline. That's what Jungkook faced on the night of July 31st, 2022 at Lollapalooza in Grant Park, Chicago. And what he did over the course of that set wasn't just a concert, it was a cultural earthquake. Let's establish the magnitude of this moment because I don't think people fully grasp how unprecedented it was. Lollapalooza is one of the 4-pillar music festivals in the United States, alongside Coachella, Bonnaroo, and Governor's Ball. Founded in 1991 by Perry Farrell of Jane's Addiction, it has historically been a rock and alternative music stronghold. Over the decades, it expanded to include hip-hop, electronic, pop, and R&B, but the headlining slots have always been reserved for acts that represent the upper echelon of Western music. We're talking Radiohead, The Cure, Eminem, Chance the Rapper, The Weeknd, Ariana Grande. Artists who have spent years, sometimes decades, building the kind of cultural capital required to close out a major festival stage. And then, in 2022, the organizers did something that sent shockwaves through the festival circuit. They gave a headlining slot on the closing night to a K-pop solo artist who had released his debut album literally 2 weeks earlier. Jack in the Box dropped on July 15th. The festival was July 31st. 16 days between album release and headlining one of America's most iconic music events. The industry reaction was immediate and divided. Festival purists questioned whether a K-pop act could command a crowd that wasn't exclusively composed of dedicated fans. Music journalists debated whether it was a genuine artistic booking or a strategic play to attract the BTS fan base's purchasing power. And on social media, the discourse was predictably chaotic. Supporters pointing to J-Hope's undeniable talent, skeptics questioning whether an idol system artist could handle the raw, unfiltered energy of a festival crowd, where there are no assigned seats, no organized fan chants, and no guarantee that the audience will even stay for your entire set. J-Hope answered every single one of those questions in the first 3 minutes. The stage setup was aggressive, industrial, dark, deliberately stripped of the polished K-pop aesthetic that Western audiences might have expected. No pastel colors, no cute visual motifs, no LED screens playing aesthetic mood films. The visual language was closer to a Kanye West Sunday service or a Travis Scott Astroworld set. Raw, almost confrontational, demanding that the audience engage on the performance terms rather than their expectations. And then J-Hope did what J-Hope does.
He danced, but not the choreographed, synchronized, precision-engineered dancing of a K-pop stage. This was freestyle. This was feel. Number 4. Here's a question that nobody in the music industry was asking in 2017. Can a K-pop idol stand at the podium of the United Nations General Assembly and command a room full of world leaders, diplomats, policymakers, and heads of state with the same authority he commands a stadium full of screaming fans? Nobody was asking it because the idea itself sounded absurd. The United Nations isn't a stage. It's not an arena. There's no bass drop, no light stick ocean, no fan chant to carry you when your voice wavers. It's a room full of people who negotiate nuclear disarmament in refugee crises for a living, and the last thing most of them are thinking about on any given Tuesday is whether a 24-year-old rapper from Ilsan, South Korea has anything meaningful to contribute to global discourse. And then, on September 24, 2018, Kim Namjoon walked to that podium, adjusted the microphone, looked directly into a room that represented the collective governance of 7 billion human beings, and delivered 7 minutes that redefined what charisma means in the 21st century. Let me be very precise about what happened here, because the cultural significance of this moment gets lost in the viral clip edits and the highlight reels. This wasn't a concert appearance. This wasn't an award show speech. BTS had been invited to participate in the launch of UNICEF's Generation Unlimited initiative at the 73rd session of the United Nations General Assembly. They were there as part of their Love Myself campaign, a partnership with UNICEF focused on ending violence against children and young people worldwide. The campaign had already raised over $1 million at that point, and UNICEF wanted a youth voice to address the assembly about self-empowerment, identity, and the psychological challenges facing young people globally. They chose RM. Not a politician, not an activist with decades of advocacy experience, not a celebrity who'd been carefully groomed for diplomatic appearances by a team of PR strategists. A rapper, a kid who grew up in a middle-class family in Ilsan, South Korea that most international audiences had never heard of, who taught himself English by watching the American sitcom Friends, who started writing rap lyrics in middle school notebooks, who auditioned for a small entertainment company that was so financially unstable it nearly went bankrupt multiple times before BTS's success saved it. That's who was standing at the United Nations podium about to address the world. Now here's where the concept of charisma enters the conversation in a way that Usher, as someone who's performed in every imaginable setting from intimate clubs to Super Bowl halftime stages, would deeply understand. Charisma isn't context dependent for truly charismatic people. A person who can only command attention when the lights, the sound system, and the crowd energy are working in their favor isn't charismatic. They're well-produced. Genuine charisma transfers across environments. It works in a stadium, it works in a talk show interview, it works in a boardroom, and it works in a United Nations chamber where nobody is required to clap, nobody is required to cheer, and the ambient energy of the room is closer to a courtroom than a concert hall. RM walked into that dead air and brought it to life. The speech opened with a line that on paper sounds almost comically simple. I'd like to begin by talking about myself, but the way Namjoon delivered it, with a slight pause before myself, a small, self-aware smile, and a vocal tone that balanced confidence with genuine humility, it immediately established a connection with every person in that room. It wasn't rehearsed warmth. It wasn't the polished, teleprompter-smooth delivery of a professional public speaker. It was real. You could see his hands trembling slightly as he held the paper. You could hear the micro catches in his breath that told you his heart rate was elevated. And yet his voice was steady. His eye contact was deliberate. His pacing, the rhythm of his sentences, the pauses between ideas, the moments where he let silence do the work, was masterful. Then he told his story. Growing up in Ilsan, looking at the night sky, dreaming, being a kid who loved music and was told by the world that dreaming was impractical. And as he spoke, something happened in that chamber that veteran UN correspondents later described as unusual. People stopped multitasking. In the General Assembly, it's common for delegates to be on their phones, reviewing documents, having sidebar conversations during speeches. It's not disrespectful, it's the reality of an organization that processes thousands of speeches annually. But multiple journalists and attendees noted that as RM spoke, the ambient noise in the chamber decreased. Phones went down, side conversations stopped. People were listening, not because they had to, but because something about this young man's voice, his sincerity, his vulnerability, his refusal to perform importance and instead simply be important, compelled attention. He talked about discovering BTS's music and how it connected him to millions of young people. He talked about the Love Myself campaign and what it means to teach an entire generation that self-worth isn't contingent on external validation. And then he reached the section of the speech that would become the most quoted, most shared, most replayed moment, the part where he talked about silencing himself. I had many faults and I had many fears, he said. I had shut out my own voice and stopped looking at myself. He described looking into the mirror and questioning everything, his identity, his purpose, whether the person staring back at him was real or a constructed persona designed to meet the world's expectations. And then he said something that made the translation earpieces across the chamber go silent because people were listening to his English directly. Maybe I made a mistake yesterday, but yesterday's me is still me. I am who I am today with all of my faults. Tomorrow might be a tiny bit wiser, and that's me too. These faults and mistakes are what I am, making up the brightest stars in the constellation of my life. In a room designed for geopolitical negotiation, a 24-year-old rapper had just delivered a philosophical statement about human identity that rivaled anything a tenured professor of existential philosophy could articulate, and he did it in his second language with shaking hands in front of cameras broadcasting to every corner of the planet. The response was unlike anything typically seen in that setting. Delegates applauded, not the polite, perfunctory applause that follows most assembly speeches, but sustained, genuine applause. UNICEF's social media channels reported that the live stream of RM's speech generated more real-time engagement than any previous UNICEF event broadcast. Within 24 hours, it had crossed 50 million views across platforms. Within a week, it had crossed 100 million. News outlets from the BBC to CNN to Al Jazeera covered it not as a K-pop novelty story, but as a genuine moment of oratorical significance. And this is where Usher's perspective becomes essential. Usher has talked about performing at the Super Bowl LVIII halftime show in 2024 and the unique pressure of commanding an audience that isn't exclusively your fans. He's described the Super Bowl stage as the ultimate test of charisma because you're performing for an audience of over 100 million, most of whom didn't tune in for you. They tuned in for football. You have to convert them in real time. You have to make casual viewers into believers within the first 30 seconds, or you've lost them. RM faced the exact same challenge at the UN, except his audience wasn't sports fans with beer and nachos. His audience was diplomats, heads of state, and career bureaucrats who've heard thousands of speeches from people far more conventionally qualified to be at that podium. And he converted them, not with spectacle, not with production value, not with vocal runs or dance breaks, with words, with presence, with the same quality that Usher himself identifies as the irreducible core of charisma. Authenticity that makes everyone in the room feel like they're being spoken to personally, even when the audience is the entire world. The ripple effects extended beyond the viral moment. RM's UN speech became a reference point in academic discussions about soft power, cultural diplomacy, and the role of popular culture in global governance. Universities from Harvard to Seoul National University incorporated the speech into communications and leadership curricula. And in the music industry, it fundamentally altered the perception of what an idol, a term often used dismissively in Western music criticism, is capable of. RM didn't just give a speech at the United Nations, he performed an act of radical vulnerability on the world's most intimidating stage and made it look like the most natural thing in the world. That's number 4. And if a man making the United Nations General Assembly feel like a fireside chat only ranks here, you should be asking yourself a very serious question. What's coming next that could possibly carry more charismatic weight than addressing the leaders of the free world? The answer involves a stage that exploded, a body that moved like it was possessed, and a moment that K-pop fans still argue is the single greatest solo performance in award show history. You already feel it coming, don't you?
Number 3. There are performances you watch, and then there are performances that fundamentally rewire the way you understand what a human body is capable of doing on a stage. Performances that don't just entertain, they alter the cultural landscape. They create a before and an after. Before this performance, J-Hope was respected. After it, he was revered. We're talking about December 1st, 2018, the Melon Music Awards. Go check Sky Dome, Seoul. 20,000 people in attendance, millions watching the broadcast live. BTS had already swept the daesangs, the grand prizes, winning every major award the ceremony had to offer, an achievement that cemented their position as the undisputed top act in Korean music. But the awards were just the appetizer, because the production team behind BTS's MMA 2018 stage had crafted something that wasn't a performance, it was an event. A 30-plus minute theatrical opus that traced BTS's evolution across musical eras, from their debut roots to their global domination. Multiple acts, multiple costume changes, multiple emotional registers. And the centerpiece, the moment that will be clipped, shared, studied, imitated, and debated for years to come, was a solo dance break by Jungkook that lasted less than 3 minutes, but contained enough charismatic energy to power a small city. Let me set the scene with surgical precision, because the staging matters as much as the dancing. The previous segment had just ended, a dark, emotionally heavy act that explored themes of pain and growth. The lights dropped to black, complete darkness, 20,000 people holding their breath, because by this point in the evening, BTS had already proven that every transition in their stage was a statement, not a filler. And then, a single drum beat. Not a modern electronic kick drum, a traditional Korean book drum, deep and resonant, the kind of sound that has echoed through Korean ceremonial music for centuries. Then another, and another. A rhythm that anyone with Korean cultural literacy would immediately recognize as rooted in samonori, the traditional percussion genre that's been performed on the Korean peninsula for generations. And into that ancient rhythm walked J-Hope, dressed in a modernized hanbok-inspired outfit, holding a buche, a traditional Korean fan used in buchechum, the fan dance that's been a staple of Korean traditional performing arts for hundreds of years. Now here's where you need to understand the audacity of what was about to happen. Buchechum is elegant, it's graceful, it's deliberate, it moves at the pace of meditation. The movements are wide, flowing, designed to create visual patterns with the fan that symbolize flowers blooming, waves crashing, nature unfolding. It is, by every traditional standard, the antithesis of hip-hop. Hip-hop is sharp. It's percussive, it's grounded in isolation, in hitting beats with mechanical precision, in using the body as a rhythmic instrument. These two dance vocabularies don't just exist in different genres, they exist in different centuries, different philosophies of movement, different understandings of what the body is supposed to communicate. And J-Hope fused them. In real time, on a live stage, in front of 20,000 people and millions of broadcast viewers. And he didn't just fuse them, he made the fusion feel inevitable, as if these two forms had always been meant to exist together, and the world has simply been waiting for someone with enough technical mastery and artistic vision to prove it. The opening seconds were pure traditional, wide-sweeping fan movements, his body flowing with the grace of a trained buche chum dancer, the book drums providing a rhythmic foundation that felt ancient and sacred. And then, without warning, the beat shifted. Electronic elements bled into the traditional percussion. A bass line emerged. The lighting changed from warm ceremonial tones to hard, aggressive concert whites. And J-Hope's body shifted with it. Mid-movement, mid-breath, he transitioned from the flowing vocabulary of traditional dance into a popping sequence that would have won him first place at any street dance battle on the planet. The fan became a prop in the hip-hop routine, flipping, spinning, punctuating dance moves with visual accents that created after-image trails under the stage lighting. And the crowd, 20,000 people who thought they knew what to expect, lost their collective minds. The fan cams from this moment are among the most viewed performance clips in K-pop history, and when you watch them, the audio tells the story better than any written description can. There's a specific second dance choreographers and dance analysts have pinpointed it frame by frame, where J-Hope executes a turn sequence that transitions from a traditional Korean spin into a hip-hop freeze, and the crowd's reaction shifts from cheering to screaming. Not the organized, rhythmic screaming of a fan chant, primal screaming, the involuntary vocal response of 20,000 human beings simultaneously witnessing something their brains can't fully process in real time. That shift from cheering to screaming is what Usher calls the break point. He's described it in interviews about his own performances as the moment when an audience stops being an audience and becomes a collective organism responding to a single stimulus. Usher experienced it himself during his 2004 Truth Tour when he performed Burn and 20,000 people in Madison Square Garden started singing along so loudly that his own vocal monitors couldn't compete. He's described it as the closest a performer gets to a religious experience, the moment when the boundary between you and the audience dissolves completely and you become one nervous system, one heartbeat, one breath. J-Hope achieved that breakpoint at MMA 2018 not through audience participation, not through a sing-along moment, not through any of the traditional tools performers use to create collective experience. He did it purely through movement, through the act of a single human body doing something so extraordinary, so technically precise, so emotionally committed that 20,000 individual consciousnesses synchronized into one response. The cultural implications were massive and immediate. Korean traditional arts organizations publicly praised the performance for introducing traditional dance forms to a global youth audience in a way that felt respectful, innovative, and genuinely exciting. Dance communities worldwide, from Seoul's underground b-boy scene to Los Angeles's commercial choreography studios to London's contemporary dance academies, analyzed the performance, with many professional dancers noting that the technical difficulty of transitioning between such fundamentally different movement vocabularies in real time on a live stage without any visible hesitation or loss of quality placed J-Hope in a category of dancer that most performers never reach regardless of how many years they train. The YouTube choreography reaction community, a niche but influential corner of the dance world where professional choreographers and dancers react to and analyze performances, exploded with content about this specific stage. Multiple videos crossed the 1 million view mark, and the consensus among professionals was remarkably uniform. This wasn't just good K-pop choreography. This was world-class dance performance, full stop. No genre qualifier needed. No asterisk for idol dancing. World class. And then there's the detail that elevates this from an incredible dance performance to a genuinely charismatic moment. J-Hope's face. Go back and watch the close-up shots. Study his expression during the traditional sections versus the hip-hop sections. During the buche chum movements, his face is serene, almost meditative, channeling the reverence and dignity of traditional Korean artistry. And the instant
The exact frame where the beat shifts to hip-hop, his expression transforms. A grin appears, not a smile, a grin. The grin of a man who knows he's about to do something dangerous and is absolutely thriving on the adrenaline. It's the same expression Usher gets during his concert dance breaks, that unmistakable look of a performer who isn't just executing choreography, but is genuinely, viscerally enjoying the act of dominating a stage. That facial shift is charisma distilled to its purest form. It's the non-verbal communication of joy, confidence, and mastery. And it's the kind of thing that cannot be rehearsed, cannot be faked, and cannot be taught. You either have it or you don't. J-Hope has it in quantities that defy measurement. The performance ended with J-Hope transitioning into the opening of Idol, the rest of BTS joining him as the stage erupted into full group choreography, pyrotechnics, and organized chaos. But by that point, the damage was done. The moment had been created, the footage existed, and it would go on to accumulate hundreds of millions of views, spawn thousands of reaction videos, and permanently alter the global conversation about what a K-pop performer, what any performer, is capable of achieving on a live stage. That's number 3. A performance so technically brilliant, so culturally significant, and so charismatically overwhelming that it redefined the upper limit of what a solo stage at an award show could be. But if this, a performance that professional dancers still call one of the greatest live dance moments of the 21st century, only sits at number 3, what could the final 2 entries possibly be? What performance could outrank fusing centuries of dance tradition into a 3-minute explosion of genius? I'll tell you this much. Number 2 doesn't involve choreography at all. It involves a man, a microphone, 60,000 people, and words that made an entire stadium cry. And it changed everything.
Number 2, strip everything away. Take away the choreography, the backing track, the LED walls, the pyrotechnics, the costumes, the production budget that could finance a small film. Take all of it away and put one man on a stage with nothing but a microphone and his thoughts. And ask yourself, does he still command 60,000 people? Because that's the test. That's the ultimate, nowhere to hide, unforgiving test of charisma. And on June 1st, 2019, inside Wembley Stadium in London, Kim Namjoon didn't just pass that test, he redefined what the test even measures. Let's start with the venue, because Wembley isn't just a stadium, it's a cathedral of cultural mythology. This is the ground where Live Aid happened in 1985, the concert that changed the relationship between music and global consciousness forever. This is where Queen delivered what many consider the greatest live performance in rock history, where Michael Jackson moonwalked in front of 72,000 people during his Bad tour, where Beyoncé filmed segments of her visual album, where Adele sang Someone Like You and made an entire nation weep simultaneously. Wembley doesn't just host concerts, it consecrates them. When you perform at Wembley, you're not competing with the other acts on your tour, you're competing with history. And BTS, 7 men from South Korea who debuted from a company so small that their practice room doubled as their bedroom, were about to headline 2 consecutive nights at this sacred ground, the first Korean act to ever do so, the first Asian act in decades. Think about the weight of that for a second. Not just the personal achievement, but the cultural significance. Every Asian musician, every Asian performer, every Asian kid who'd been told that Western entertainment spaces weren't built for faces that look like theirs. This moment carried all of their dreams on his shoulders. The concert itself was extraordinary. BTS delivered a set list that spanned their entire discography, from the raw hunger of their early hip-hop tracks to the polished, stadium-ready anthems of the Love Yourself era. The choreography was razor-sharp. The vocal performances were emotionally charged. The crowd, 60,000 army strong, matched every note, every fan chant, every beat with an energy that turned Wembley into a living, breathing organism of sound and light. But the moment, the one that earned this spot on the list, the one that makes even casual observers who have no emotional investment in BTS stop scrolling and watch with their full attention, came at the very end,
After the encore, after the last song, when the setlist was technically over and the production crew was probably already mentally packing equipment, RM stepped forward. The other 6 members stood behind him, some of them already visibly emotional. The stadium was still buzzing with post-concert adrenaline. 60,000 people who had just experienced 2.5 hours of peak-level performance, riding the high, not yet ready to return to reality. And RM raised his microphone and started talking. Not performing, talking. What followed was not a prepared speech. It wasn't a scripted PR-approved closing statement designed to hit emotional beats at calculated intervals. It was a man standing in front of 60,000 people in a stadium that has hosted some of the most significant musical moments in human history, deciding in real time to be completely, devastatingly honest. He talked about the journey, about debuting in 2013 from a company that nobody in the industry took seriously, about performing in small venues where the audience was sometimes outnumbered by the staff, about the years of being dismissed by the Korean music establishment as just another idol group without artistic credibility. And then his voice changed. The confident leader mode tone that RM usually projects during public speaking softened into something raw, something closer to a confession. He talked about almost quitting, and when he said it, 60,000 people went silent. Not the polite, attentive silence of an audience waiting for the next sentence, the stunned, gut-punch silence of people hearing something they weren't prepared for. RM, the leader of the biggest band in the world, the man who'd spoken at the United Nations, who'd been on the cover of Time magazine, who'd broken every record the music industry had to measure success, stood in the middle of Wembley Stadium and admitted that there were moments when he wanted to stop. Moments when the pressure, the criticism, the relentless scrutiny of being the leader and primary spokesperson of a global phenomenon made him question whether he was strong enough to continue. Moments when looking in the mirror didn't show him RM, leader of BTS. It showed him Kim Namjoon, a kid from Ilsan who liked reading books and writing poems and wasn't sure he was built for the scale of what his life had become. The stadium was so quiet you could hear the London evening breeze moving through the open roof. 60,000 people, silent. Not because they were told to be, not because the production team had orchestrated a quiet moment in the show, because the man on stage was being so honest, so vulnerable, so unprotected by the armor of performance that the only appropriate response was to bear witness in silence. And then RM said something that broke the dam. The exact words vary slightly depending on which fan cam you watch and which translation you follow, but the essence was this. He said that standing here at Wembley, looking out at 60,000 people who chose to spend their evening with 7 boys from Korea, he finally understood that maybe the pain was worth it. That maybe every moment of doubt, every sleepless night, every time he questioned his own worth had been leading to this exact second, in this exact place, with these exact people. And he said thank you, not the casual performative thank you that artists say at the end of every show. A thank you that carried the weight of 6 years of struggle, of imposter syndrome, of carrying the emotional burden of leadership for a group that represents hope and healing to millions worldwide. He said thank you like a man who had been drowning and after years of fighting the current, had finally felt solid ground under his feet. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming, not cheering, crying. 60,000 people crying. The fan cams from Wembley that night are some of the most emotionally intense concert footage that exist in modern pop music. You can hear the sobs, individual, identifiable sobs cutting through the ambient sound. You can see people in the upper tiers, hundreds of meters from the stage, wiping their faces. You can see RM's own members, hardened, seasoned performers who've been on thousands of stages, turning away from the cameras because they couldn't hold it together either. And RM stood there, tears streaming down his face, still holding the microphone, still standing, still being the leader, even in his most broken, most human, most unperformer-like moment. That is charisma in its deepest, most unmanufactured form. Not the charisma of dance, not the charisma of vocal prowess, not the charisma of visual spectacle, the charisma of truth. the charisma of a human being standing in front of other human beings and saying, I am not okay, and I am here, and that is enough. Usher knows this charisma intimately. He's lived it. During his Confessions era, the album born from his real-life romantic turmoil, the public breakup, the tabloid scrutiny, Usher didn't hide behind upbeat performances. He sang Burn and Confessions Part 2 with a rawness that audiences could feel was coming from a genuine wound. He's spoken about how those performances were therapeutic, how the act of being honest on stage created a connection with the audience that no amount of choreography or production could replicate. He's called it performing through pain, and he's identified it as the highest level of artistry a performer can reach. RM reached that level at Wembley, without choreography, without a backing track, without any of the tools that performers typically rely on to create emotional impact. Just a man, a microphone, and the truth. And he made 60,000 people feel that truth so deeply in their bodies that they wept. Not because they were sad, because they were seen. Because RM's honesty about his own struggles, his own doubt, his own fear, his own almost quitting gave 60,000 people permission to acknowledge their own pain. In that moment, Wembley wasn't a concert venue. It was a collective exhale, a shared acknowledgement that being human is hard and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand in front of the world and admit it. The clips from that speech have been viewed hundreds of millions of times. They've been translated into dozens of languages. They've been cited in psychology articles about parasocial relationships and the therapeutic power of public vulnerability. And they all originate from one man, one microphone, and the decision to be honest at a scale that most humans can't even conceptualize. That's number 2. RM at Wembley Stadium. The night charisma stopped being about performance and started being about presence. But here's the question you should be asking right now, the question that should be making your pulse quicken and your curiosity burn like a furnace. If a man making 60,000 people cry with nothing but his words sits at number 2, what in the world is number 1? What performance, what moment, what display of charisma could possibly outrank raw emotional devastation at Wembley? I'll tell you this, number 1 goes back to the stage, back to the lights, back to the music, and it proves something that Usher has believed his entire career, that the purest, most powerful, most undeniable form of charisma isn't pain, it isn't vulnerability, it isn't technical mastery, it's joy, uncontainable, infectious, world-altering joy. And there's only one person on this list who weaponizes joy the way the sun weaponizes light.
Number 1. Every single entry on this list has shown you a different face of charisma, the artistry of contemporary dance, the conviction of a solo rap stage, the conquest of a foreign festival crowd, the gravity of addressing world leaders, the cultural genius of fusing tradition with modernity, the devastating beauty of radical vulnerability. 7 performances, 7 dimensions of what it means to hold human attention and transform it into something transcendent. But here, at the very top of this list, at the peak of everything Usher, a man who has dedicated over 30 years of his life to understanding the alchemy of stage performance, would consider the ultimate display of charisma. We arrive at a truth so simple, it's almost embarrassing. The highest form of charisma isn't darkness. It isn't pain. It isn't technical perfection. It isn't even vulnerability. The highest form of charisma is joy, pure, uncontaminated, weaponized joy, the kind of joy that doesn't ask permission, the kind that doesn't negotiate, the kind that hits you in the chest like a shock wave and rearranges your emotional architecture before your conscious mind has time to decide whether or not you want to participate. And on this entire planet, across every genre, every culture, every generation of performers currently active, there is no one who deploys joy as a performance weapon with the precision and devastation of Jungkook performing Trivia Just Dance on the Love Yourself World Tour. Let me tell you exactly why this is number 1, and let me tell you why it's not even close. The Love Yourself World Tour ran from August 2018 through April 2019, with the Speaker Self Stadium extension continuing through October 2019. Across those dates, BTS performed in arenas and stadiums on virtually every inhabitable continent: Seoul, Tokyo, Osaka, London, Paris, Berlin, Amsterdam, Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, Sao Paulo, Riyadh. Millions of people, dozens of cities, every show meticulously produced, with a set list designed to take audiences on an emotional journey from darkness to light, from pain to healing, from self-doubt to self-love. The entire thematic arc of the Love Yourself album series compressed into a 2.5-hour live experience. And in the architecture of that set list, Trivia Just Dance occupied a very specific structural position. It came after a sequence of emotionally heavier performances, songs about heartbreak, loss, identity crisis, the weight of fame. The audience, by the time J-Hope's solo stage arrived, had been emotionally worked over. They'd screamed, they'd cried, they'd held their breath during the intense choreography numbers and released it during the ballads. They were emotionally open, emotionally raw, emotionally available in a way that only a BTS concert, with its almost therapeutic emotional pacing, can achieve. And then the light shifted. The color palette of the entire stadium transformed. Gone were the moody blues and intense reds and stark whites of the previous segments. In their place, warm golds, electric pinks, vibrant oranges, party colors, celebration colors, and a beat dropped through the speakers that was so infectiously groovy, so impossibly funky, so engineered at a molecular level to make human bodies move, that the transition from emotional heaviness to physical euphoria happened in the space between one heartbeat and the next. And then J-Hope appeared, and he was smiling. Not the performative smile of an idol fulfilling a concept, not the polished, camera-ready expression of a trained entertainer. A real smile, the kind that reaches the eyes, that changes the geometry of the entire face, that radiates so much genuine warmth you can almost feel the temperature in the arena rise. And from the first step, the first gesture, the first body roll that rippled through his frame like electricity through water, the arena transformed. Not metaphorically, physically, measurably, documentably transformed. Here is what happened at every single venue on that tour during Trivia Just Dance, and here is why Usher would put it at #1 above everything else on this list. People danced. Not some people, not the front rows, not the die-hard fans who know every fan chant and every choreography mirror. Everyone, entire stadiums of people, 40, 50, 60,000 human beings moving their bodies in response to one man's energy. Upper decks where people had been sitting all night, suddenly standing, bouncing, swaying. Corporate box seats where industry executives and their guests had been observing with professional detachment, suddenly loosening ties and nodding heads. Security guards posted at barriers, people literally paid to stand still and maintain order, caught on fan cam unconsciously bobbing to the rhythm while J-Hope blazed past them on the extended stage. Every single show, every single city, every single continent, the same result. And that consistency is what separates this from every other performance on this list. Boy Meets Evil at Mama 2016 was a singular moment of artistic brilliance. Intro to Persona was a one-night declaration of identity. Lollapalooza was a historic conquest. The UN was a once-in-a-lifetime speech. MMA 2018 was a cultural earthquake. Wembley was an emotional revelation. Each of those performances was extraordinary, but each was also, to some degree, context-dependent. They were elevated by the specific circumstances, the specific audiences, the specific historical weight of their respective moments. Trivia Just Dance was context-independent. It worked everywhere. It worked in Seoul, where the crowd already loved J-Hope with the intensity of a homeland audience. It worked in Chicago, where half the stadium had never seen BTS live before. It worked in Sao Paulo, where the cultural relationship to rhythm and dance is fundamentally different from East Asian performance traditions.
It worked in Paris, in London, in cities across the Middle East. It worked regardless of language barriers, cultural differences, age demographics, or pre-existing fandom loyalty. Because joy doesn't need translation. Joy doesn't need context. Joy is the one human experience that is truly, universally, unimpeachably understood. And J-Hope didn't just perform joy, he became it. The choreography for Trivia Just Dance was deliberately less technically complex than J-Hope's other solo stages. This was an intentional, brilliant, creative decision. The movements were groove-based, body rolls, hip isolations, loose footwork, freestyle sections that changed every night because J-Hope fed off the specific energy of each crowd and responded in real time. Instead of asking the audience to watch in awe at technical mastery, which he'd already proven he could deliver in spades at MMA 2018 and countless other stages, this performance asked the audience to participate. The choreography was accessible enough that people in the crowd could mirror it, could feel it in their own bodies, could become part of the performance rather than passive observers of it. And this exact principle is the core of Usher's entire performance philosophy. Go back and study Usher's concert footage from any era, his OMG tour, his URX tour, his Las Vegas residency, his Super Bowl 58 halftime show. Watch what happens during Watch what happens during DJ Got Us Falling in Love when he slows it down and grooves. The crowd moves. Not because the music is loud, not because the screens are telling them to, because Usher's body is communicating in a language that bypasses the intellect and speaks directly to the limbic system, the part of the brain that processes rhythm, pleasure, and social bonding. He makes you dance because his joy is so authentic, so kinetically expressed, so generously shared that your body responds before your mind can object. And J-Hope does the exact same thing, at the exact same level, with the exact same results. But he does it in stadiums. He does it across cultural boundaries that even Usher, who primarily performs for Western audiences familiar with R&B and pop traditions, has never had to navigate. J-Hope makes a grandmother in Tokyo dance with the same move that makes a teenager in London dance, with the same move that makes a 30-year-old man in Sao Paulo dance who came to the concert because his girlfriend dragged him and fully expected to stand with his arms crossed for 2 hours. That man is dancing during Trivia Just Dance every single time, every single show. There are fan-compiled videos, supercuts pulling footage from dozens of concert dates across the entire tour that document this phenomenon with almost scientific rigor. Camera angles from every section of every arena showing the same result, the wave of movement that begins at the front of the standing section and ripples backward through the seated areas until the entire venue is in motion. Not organized motion, not synchronized fan chant movements. Organic motion, individual, joyful motion, each person moving in their own way, at their own comfort level, but all moving because one man on a distant stage made standing still feel impossible. And here's the final detail, the one that locks this into #1 with absolute certainty. During every performance of Trivia Just Dance, there's a section near the end where J-Hope runs, literally sprints from one end of the extended stage to the other, covering sometimes 100 meters or more. And as he runs, he's pointing at sections of the crowd. He's waving, he's laughing, and the sections he acknowledges erupts in movement. Not in screams, in movement. He's conducting the arena like a symphony of human joy, and every section he acknowledges responds by dancing harder, jumping higher, radiating more energy back at him, which he absorbs and redirects to the next section, creating a feedback loop of joy that builds and builds and builds until the entire venue is vibrating at a frequency that feels genuine.
So there it is, 7 performances. 2 men, one list that proves charisma isn't a single skill, it's a spectrum. And RM and J-Hope own every inch of it. From the sacred silence of a contemporary dance solo at Mama 2016 to the philosophical fire of a solo rap stage that dared to ask, "Who am I?" on national television. From a kid from Gwangju conquering 100,000 strangers in a Chicago field to a kid from Ilsan making the United Nations stop and listen. From a 3-minute fusion of centuries-old tradition and modern street dance that rewrote the rules of what a K-pop stage can be, to a speech at Wembley Stadium so honest it made 60,000 people cry without a single note of music. And at the very top, a man, a groove, and a smile so powerful it turned every arena on earth into a dance floor, every stranger into a dancer, and every concert into proof that joy is the most unstoppable force a performer can wield. Usher built a career on the belief that a stage is sacred ground, that when you step into that light, you owe the audience nothing less than the full, unfiltered truth of who you are. Not a character, not a concept. You. And what makes RM and J-Hope extraordinary, what makes them worthy of being studied by a man who shared air with Michael Jackson, Prince, and James Brown, is that they understood that truth from the very beginning. RM's charisma lives in his mind and his words. He doesn't need to be the sharpest dancer or the flashiest visual. He walks to a microphone, opens his mouth, and makes you feel like every syllable was written specifically for the version of you that's standing in that crowd on that night. His charisma is gravitational, quiet, steady, inescapable. It pulls you in before you realize you've moved. J-Hope's charisma lives in his body and his spirit. He doesn't need a speech or a viral moment. He steps onto a stage and the air changes. The rhythm finds you before the sound does. His charisma is solar, bright, warm, impossible to look away from, and generous enough to reach every single person in a stadium of 60,000 without losing a single degree of intensity. Two completely different engines, two completely different frequencies, and yet both produce the same result. Rooms full of human beings who walked in as individuals and walked out as something more, something connected, something changed. That's not talent. Talent is common. That's not hard work. Hard work is expected. That's charisma. The real kind. The kind that doesn't fade when the lights come up. The kind that follows you home and sits in your chest for days. The kind that makes a man like Usher, who has seen everything, done everything, performed with everyone, stop, pay attention, and say with the full weight of 3 decades of expertise, those two got it. And if this list taught you anything, it should be this. Charisma isn't born. It's not genetic. It's not luck. Charisma is the product of a person who knows exactly who they are, accepts every fractured, imperfect, contradictory piece of themselves, and then walks onto a stage and offers all of it, every scar, every joy, every doubt, every triumph, to a room full of strangers and says, "This is me, and I'm not holding anything back." RM does it with words, J-Hope does it with movement, and the world will be talking about both of them long, long after the last encore fades. This has been the top 7 most charismatic RM and J-Hope stage performances, according to the standard set by the king of the stage himself, Usher. Thanks for staying to the end. Now go watch every single performance on this list. Trust me, the screen doesn't do them justice, but it's the closest most of us will ever get to standing in that light. And honestly, even through a screen, you'll feel it, because charisma like this doesn't need proximity. It just needs you to press play.